Bueno, aquí estamos con Larry Harlow, el famoso y gran músico de salsa, de música afrocubana, the great Larry Harlow, one of the most important musicians.
Lo dice en español, no en
¿Tú
inglés.
quieres? Puede ser los dos.
A mitad, Spanglish.
Okay, we can do that.
Está
Code
bien.
switching. We can do code
Está
switching.
bien, está bien.
You're considered to be one of the most important musicians of salsa, and you are Jewish. And one of the things that we're going to be talking about tomorrow in our conference is the connection between Jews and salsa and Latinos and all of that mixing and all of that collaboration. And you're one of the pioneers. You started playing very early.
Well,
Can you talk about that a little bit?
There were several before me. I don't think they reached the level of popularity that I have, but we must remember Mr. Al Levy, who was Alfredito. His name was Alfredito. Barry Rogers, who played for many years with Eddie Palmieri. Mr. Mark Weinstein, who's now a professor at Montclair State. A very fine trombonist, flautist. Harvey Avern, Irv Greenbaum, Pancho Cristal, you know, a great producer for Tico and Alegre. Yeah, these are great, really great Jewish people that some came from Cuba, some came from Brooklyn, you know, and then they went on to become really very influential in the Latin music business, either as musicians, producers, songwriters, etc., etc. But basically, I got influenced in the music. My father was my father's of Austrian descent, and my mother of Russian descent, and they were both born in the United States here in New York City. And my father was a musician at a club called the Latin Quarter in New York, which is a very famous nightclub, which was owned by Barbara Walters' father. Wow. And kind of the two of us, she was a little older than I, but the two of us used to sit in the Spotlight booth and watch Steve Martin and Jerry Lewis and all the famous comedians and singers. And my father had what you call a continental band. So he used to play, if somebody from Texas came in, he'd play Deep in the Heart of Texas. Someone from Italy came in, he'd play an Italian song. Someone from Spain came in, he'd play a Spanish song. So he would sing in several languages, although he was not fluent in the languages. And
this is in the 50s.
40s and
50s.
40s and 50s. And he was discovered at the Tavern on the Green by Lou Walters, Barbara Walters' father, and brought him to the Latin Quarter right after World War II. So he went all through the late 40s and all through the 50s into the 60s as the relief orchestra, as the dance orchestra. So I kind of like grew up backstage with him, and I went to Music and Art High School, which was in the middle of Spanish Harlem. So I kind of got, every time I got out of the subway, I would hear Jose Cobello or Tito Puente, 1, 2, 3, Al Castellanos together, 1, 2, 3, cha-cha-cha, bailando, cha-cha. And I said, what kind of music is this? This is great music. And I always wanted to be a jazz player. But if in those days, if you were not a drug addict or if you were not a African American, it was very hard to break into the jazz circle. So I kind of migrated to the closest musical form where I could still improvise and still have a little freedom of expression, which was Latin music. And it had much more rhythmic content, which kind of drew me closer. And here I was in Spanish Harlem. So I started playing with African Americans, playing Latin American music. And then I just got good at it. And then 1956, I made my first trip to Havana, Cuba on a Christmas vacation and fell in love with the cha-cha-cha.
And can you talk a little bit about what was happening in New York in the 60s? Because I think that was a really important period of experimentation where music is changing, all of these
everything was changing, yeah.
You know, and everything is just, you know, changing rapidly.
It was the time of Vietnam. It was the time of Woodstock. It was the time of Black Panthers. It was the time of revolution. And the Hispanics were looking for something to identify with, and what they did is they put a name on this Afro-Cuban music. The music kind of, Latin music kind of developed into a, I would say, experimental field. The music from Cuba was non-existent anymore once Fidel Castro came into power in 1960, and we were looking for something to identify with. So between changing the lyrics and putting a little more meaning into the lyrics, putting a little more substance into the harmonic structures, mixing it with a little New York bebop, making the arrangements a little better. These bands just started popping up, Johnny Pacheco and Charlie Palmieri and Eddie Palmieri. And Of course, there was always Tito Puente, Machito, and Tito Rodriguez,
Right.
the big three. They were always there.
And
then-
Mongo.
And Mungo, yeah. And then a little Latin jazz on the side, a little Cal Jada mixed in, a little Willie Bobo. And all of a sudden, there was Larry Harlow gets an idea to put trumpets together with trombones. There had never been a band with trumpets and trombones before. They were either conjuntos with trumpets
Right.
or big orchestras like Tito Puente with saxophones and trumpets. So I kind of developed a new kind of sound, and I started writing original material, and I picked my favorite musicians, and we started in 1964 actually, and the people just followed the bands around. They supported the music and just
And
gave
you could
it.
fill stadiums, 80,000 people.
Well, not in the
Yan-
60s.
Yankee, but in the 70s and Yankee
Yeah,
Stadium.
in the 70s it started 40,000, 30,000, and then once we went out on tour to South America, and we wound up playing in soccer stadiums, for 80,000 and 90,000 people. And once the Fania movies came out, and once the films came out, it kind of exploded our popularity onto a worldwide stage rather than the United States. So it opened the doors to Venezuela and Colombia and Peru and Bolivia and Panama and Mexico and